There's something strange about how we think growth works. Most of us imagine progress as motion, movement, noise, sparks flying, big moments, finished products. We think transformation looks like a bowl spinning on the lathe, curls of walnut or hickory flying through the air, the shape finally emerging out of a block like magic. But the truth is, most meaningful work happens long before anybody sees the final form. Sometimes the most important season in your life looks like standing at a cluttered workbench with a cracked piece of wood, some sticky epoxy, and a project that isn't even ready yet. That's where we are today. Welcome back to another episode of Grace, Grit, and Grounds. Grab your coffee, pull up a chair in the shop for a while, and let's have a conversation. Today's probably going to be a quieter episode than most. Less turning, a lot more preparation, more thinking, more reflection. And honestly, maybe that's exactly what some of us need. Because not every season is a season of production. Some seasons are for preparation. Some seasons are for repair. Some seasons are for refinement before the pressure comes. And if you skip those seasons, eventually life exposes the cracks anyway. So today I've got a couple slabs sitting here in the shop that I've been waiting to work on for a while. One's hickory and one's walnut. You guys know I love those pieces of wood. Both of them are beautiful in their own way. Both are also damaged in their own way. Feels a little familiar, doesn't it? The walnut slab has a long line of rot cutting right through the middle of it. It's deep enough that if you ignore it or try to build with it anyway, eventually it would just fall apart. Maybe not immediately, maybe not visibly, but the weakness is there whether you acknowledge it or not. The hickory has a deep fissure running all the way through it too. The hickory is a strong wood. It's heavy. It's tough. But even strong wood cracks under the right conditions. A lot of strong people do as well. That's one of the lies we tell ourselves sometimes. We think strength means never cracking, never struggling, never slowing down. But real strength is often knowing when something needs attention before it collapses completely. So today we're mixing some epoxy. It's not glamorous work. It's not even exciting work, I'll be honest. It's preparation work, repair work, the kind of work that nobody posts dramatic music over, but it's necessary. I've always found it interesting that in Scripture, God spends far more time preparing people than displaying people. Moses spends 40 years in the wilderness before leading Israel. David spends years tending sheep before he wears a crown. Jacob went through his trials. 14 years he spent paying the bride price for the woman he loves. His son Joseph ended up in prison for years for a crime he never committed, with a promise of potential release that never comes until the country is in dire need. Jesus himself spends roughly 30 years in obscurity before 3 years of ministry. Now I want you to think about that for a minute. The entirety of the gospel, almost completely, is about 3 years of ministry. There is almost nothing written about from the time that Jesus was born until he steps into the river to be baptized by John the Baptist. We have one scene of his childhood where his family leaves him accidentally in the temple. Other than that, it's completely silent. The Son of God spent most of his earthly life in preparation. Quiet years, ordinary years, working years, hidden years. And yet we get frustrated when our own lives don't move fast enough. We think if nothing dramatic is happening, then obviously nothing important is happening. But some of God's deepest work happens in hidden places, in workshops, in wildernesses, in waiting rooms, in late nights, in unfinished seasons. One of the things I've learned about working with epoxy is that preparation matters almost more than the pour itself. If you don't seal the gaps first, the epoxy just runs out. You think you're feeling something, but it's leaking the whole time. Some people live like that, emotionally and spiritually, always pouring themselves out, always exhausted, always empty, because every crack is open and nothing's sealed. There are no boundaries. There's no real rest. There's no healing happening. There's no stillness. And eventually everything you pour drains away before you can strengthen anything. That's why sometimes God slows us down. It's not to punish us. Sometimes it's to seal the gaps. It's to keep the grace from leaking out of the wounds we refuse to acknowledge. So I started mixing this epoxy up. I used blue mica powder in it, so you can tell the swirling there. I love the color. It's one of my favorite colors to use because I don't see color well, and this is one of the ones that I do see. Honestly, for me, it looks almost like galaxies moving through water. And I never know exactly how much I'm going to need because the cracks that I'm dealing with go deep into the wood. The rot in this piece of walnut, it actually goes deeper into the cracks and the wood than I can possibly imagine. I found that the wood hides things. I can't help but feel like people do as well. Sometimes what looks like a surface issue has roots running far deeper underneath than we can imagine. Fear usually does. Bitterness, I know, does. Grief does. Exhaustion definitely does. You think you're tired because of this week. And then you finally slow down long enough to realize that you've been carrying things for years. That's why preparation season matters. Because you finally get still enough to notice what's actually broken. I always mix a little extra epoxy because I've learned something over time. There's usually another piece nearby that needs attention as well. I think that'll preach a little if you let it. Restoration tends to overflow. The grace God pours into your life eventually becomes grace you can pour into somebody else's. That's one of the beautiful things about healthy people. They become safe places, steady places. They stop bleeding on everybody around them. They stop reacting out of unhealed wounds. And suddenly they've got enough left over to help strengthen somebody else. So while those slabs sit curing, I decided to move over to the workbench. I've got this beautiful piece of curly maple. It's a pretty long piece of wood that I bought from that Indiana lumber mill. And it's thick and it's nice. And curly maple is one of those woods that almost hides its beauty right up until the light hits it just right. At first glance, it can look a little bit plain, but if you turn it, if you finish it, if you slap some oil on it, suddenly the figure wakes up like rolling fire under the grain. Some people are like that too. Quiet strength with hidden depth, beauty that doesn't scream for attention. And sometimes God spends years shaping things in people nobody else notices yet. I start cutting the blanks out of the board, measuring and marking, running the chop saw, nothing fancy, just prep work. And honestly, that's where a lot of life happens. Most of adulthood is prep work. Parenting is prep work. Marriage is prep work. Discipleship is prep work. Prayer and studying scripture, both are prep work. Nobody sees most of it. Nobody applauds consistency and much anymore, but foundations matter. Preparation matters. The bowl doesn't happen without the blank. The blank doesn't happen without the board being cut. The board doesn't happen without years of growth nobody witnessed in the forest. We live in a culture obsessed with finished products. Finished bodies, finished careers, finished platforms, finished, fully fleshed out ministries, finished success stories. But God often works in the process, the slow process, the layered process. And honestly, thank the Lord for that, because some of us are still under construction. Some of us are still healing, still relearning rest, still rediscovering joy, still figuring out who we are after life cracked us open just a little. And that doesn't make us a failure. It makes us human. One of the hardest things for driven people to accept is that slowing down can actually be very productive. I am incredibly guilty of this. And that's why when I sit and talk with other men like me, I can fully understand them because I've met a lot of men just like this. Men that tend to measure themselves by output, by usefulness, by accomplishment. I identify with them so I can say this with confidence that if we aren't producing something, we feel guilty. But even fields need seasons of rest where they are left alone. Orchards have winters. Jesus himself withdrew from the crowds often. You cannot run endlessly without consequences. We weren't designed to do that. And if you never stop voluntarily, eventually your body, mind, or soul will force the issue. Sometimes preparation seasons feel frustrating because they look unproductive from the outside. But roots are developing underground during those seasons. Strength is forming. Wisdom is forming. Character, ultimately, is forming. And those things matter far more than temporary visibility. Eventually, I am able to move fully into the lathe. Finally, I get to do some turning. I've got this walnut blank that I've already prepared, and I did this maybe a month or so before. I had prepared it with some gold flecked epoxy running through the center of this board. There was a deep center of rot that used to be there, and I chipped out a bunch of it and poured the epoxy in the center because I wanted to try to redeem this piece of wood. And honestly, this is one of my favorite projects. I just love doing that. I love it when damaged places become part of the beauty instead of something hidden away. That's the real story of redemption. Not pretending damage never existed, but transforming it into something meaningful. That's what the Lord does. The disciples carried scars after the resurrection, the kind of scars that were internal, the ones that struggled to deal with all the weight that the death on the cross of their beloved teacher, mentor, and friend brought to them. Jesus carried the scars after the resurrection. Those wounds aren't erased, but they are used to redeem. I think this matters more than we realize. So I get to work. I start turning. The shavings are flying, and the shape starts to emerge. And for a while, everything begins to feel smooth. Progress feels visible. You ever have seasons like that? Where life finally feels like it's all coming together? Where momentum returns? Where things finally are starting to make sense again? Those seasons are gifts. Enjoy them. But I would encourage you to stay humble in them as well, because hidden problems still exist sometimes underneath the surface. When I started this bowl, I had a plan. I wanted to make something small, something beautiful. It's a piece of walnut, and you can see where I poured the epoxy right down the center of it. I haven't had a lot of luck working with these epoxy bowls. Every once in a while, I'll have one that succeeds, and it is absolutely gorgeous. And I really want this to be one of those bowls. And I've hesitated working on it for a while because I didn't want to be disappointed. I didn't want to get into the middle of it and have it fall apart on me. And I was struggling at the bottom of this bowl to get it where it needed to be. And if you look closely, you can see there's some tear outs and some chips and some problems that's going on there with the bowl turning. But I kept at it because I really want this piece to be beautiful. I have an image in my mind of what I think it's going to be. So flipping it around and getting it on the chuck, I was able to use the Forstner bits to widen it out a little bit. And I was able to get the shape into the shape that I think is going to be its final form. It's not a very fancy bowl. It's just a simple bowl shape, And I start sanding the bowl, and that's when I notice it. There's a bunch of tiny air bubbles inside the epoxy. Imperfections that I found underneath the surface that, well, I didn't know was there. Now, technically, I could have ignored it. I could have pushed through and I could have finished this bowl. I could have put some oil on it, turned the camera at just the right angle, and I don't even know if most people looking at it from this vantage point would even notice. But I would know. And honestly, one of the biggest lessons maturity teaches is this: not everything has to be finished today. Sometimes wisdom looks like stopping, setting something aside, and coming back when it's ready. That's hard for people like me. Maybe for you too. We want completion. We want closure. We want accomplishment. But rushing damaged things usually only creates worse problems later. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to admit this needs more work. Not failure, not quitting, just honesty. I think spiritually we do this too. We try to force finished versions of ourselves before God's work is fully complete. We fake healing. We fake peace. We fake maturity. We definitely fake strength. Meanwhile, there are still bubbles underneath the surface, waiting to crack open later under pressure. And God, in His mercy, sometimes says, no, we're not done here yet. Not because He's angry, but because He cares too much to leave us shallow and unfinished. I've used this passage a lot. It's one of my favorites. The Apostle Paul says in the book of Philippians, "He who began a good work in you will carry it out to completion." That verse comforts me more than I am willing to admit, because it reminds me that I'm still in process. I'm still being shaped. I'm still being sanded. I'm still learning. I'm still healing. And maybe you are too. Maybe this season isn't your season for full speed production yet. Maybe this season is your season to retool, to repair the cracks that have been revealed, to reinforce weak places, to rest, to pray, and to pray again, to reconnect with your family, to rediscover joy, to rebuild maybe some discipline, to return to Scripture, to remember who you are apart from your output. There's no shame in preparation. Athletes prepare, farmers prepare, builders prepare, craftsmen like us prepare. Even creation itself operates in preparation. Seeds buried before harvest, roots before fruit, morning before daylight fully breaks. God built preparation into the fabric of the world. So maybe don't despise the quieter season you're in. Maybe the hidden work matters more than you realize. Maybe some of you watching this feels a little unfinished right now, like the bowl sitting off to the side of my shop, partially shaped, but not ready yet, still needing attention. If you're there, listen to me carefully. Unfinished doesn't mean worthless. Delayed doesn't mean discarded. Needing repair doesn't mean ruined. Some of the most beautiful pieces in my shop started out as wood other people would have burned. And God has always had the habit of building beautiful things out of what the world gives up on. So today's episode isn't really about turning bowls. It's not about epoxy. It's not about that curly maple or even the walnut. Not really. It's about remembering that preparation matters. Healing matters. Rest matters. The hidden work matters. And maybe if you're in one of those quieter seasons right now, my encouragement to you would be, don't fight quite so hard. Maybe sit with the Lord for a little while longer. Maybe let Him fill in the cracks properly this time. Maybe let Him do deeper work instead of faster work. Because grace builds what grit sustains. And sometimes grit looks like staying faithful in the unfinished seasons too. I want to thank you for spending some time in the shop with me today. I'm so glad that you're here. If something I've said resonates, if something I said hits home, if something I said might be of benefit to someone you know, like and subscribe to this channel. Send a link to a friend. Drop me a note in the comments because I care that you're here. Until we see each other again, keep the coffee warm and the conversation flowing.